Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we are going to leverage the pieces of information that we've just learned. We have this user document reference, and from this user document reference, we got a snapshot. The snapshot allows us to check whether or not there's an instance of it that exists inside of our database, and it also allows us to access the data. So how do we do this? How are we going to set up our code? Well, let's write some pseudocode first. What I want to do is I want to first check if user data exists. If it does, then I don't want to do anything. I just want to return back this user document reference. If the data does not exist, though, so let's say if user data does not exist. So here, this is what happens if user data exists. If user data does not exist, what I want to do is I want to create/set the document with the data from user auth in my collection. And I want to set it using this user snapshot. Because remember, it's already pointing to a specific place in a collection for the data that we want. So to do this, I'm going to say first if, so I'm going to use the bang operator, which means that if the snapshot exists. So remember, it gives us a Boolean. So if it exists, then it'll return true. If it doesn't exist, it gives us false. And with the bang, I'm reversing it. So that means that if it doesn't exist, this will return true. If it does not exist, because if it does not exist, then I want to create and set the document. So to do that, I need to pull off the display name, and I want the email from our user auth object. If you remember, those are fields that is on this object alongside with our UID. And then what I also want to do is I want to make just a created at. So this is just going to be a new date object. This way we know when these users are signing in. Then in order to set this document, we need a try catch block. If you don't know what try catch is, essentially this just means I want you to try something asynchronous. If whatever you try in here throws an error, then you're going to catch that error and you're going to do something with it within this block. So what we're going to try is we are going to try to set the document. So as we know, if getDoc gets us the document, then setDoc allows us to set the document. And similarly, what we're going to pass it is a user doc reference that we just got back using the doc. And then we're going to pass it the data we want to set it with. So here we want to set a display name, we want to set a email, and we want to set a created at date. And this is pretty much all we need. Beyond that, what about the error? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to console log that there was an error creating the user, and I'm also going to log the error message that comes from the error. So this is all that's going to happen if our user snapshot does not exist. But what happens if the user data exists? So if it exists, then this is not even going to run, because this is going to return true, right? User snapshot exists, which the bang will flip so it evaluates the false, meaning this whole setting step is going to skip. So we can just return user doc reference. And now, just to be sure, let's just save this code and see what happens. So let's just walk through this again. We check to see if the snapshot exists. If it does not exist, then we want to set it inside of our database. So we're just saying, yo, set the doc with this object. So what we're going to do here is we are just going to also in here const user doc reference, because now we know no matter what happens, we should get back a doc reference. And I want to await this because again, this is an asynchronous step. In fact, we don't even need to do any of this yet. We can actually see it directly in our collection if it works. So let's just test that. So let me refresh this. Let me trigger the pop-up. Let me sign into my Google account. And now again, we see that it's false, of course, because we just wrote the code for our collection for the first time. And now if we go into our database and we refresh, we see we now have a users collection, and there it is. There is our user created today. So this is really great because that's all we really need. We can now authenticate our users, allow them to come in, but also now we can just simply update our database with all of these authenticated users and their relevant data. So we have now created a way to create users. So this is really handy because using this system, we now have authentication as well as storage of these users inside of our application. Authentication and users is typically a very complicated feature to build because it involves servers, backends, and all that. But here we've achieved it using Firebase, and we just had to learn a little bit of Firebase along the way. So this is it. We're now creating user documents. We now have those documents and references. We can use them for signing in and signing out users. This is pretty good now. We can start utilizing this inside of our application. Before we do any of that though, let's just make sure that we also commit our changes. So what we want to do is we want to git add. Let's just git commit our message, which is that we have added our sign in component as well as Firebase utils and brought in Firebase libraries. And then we can push this up. And that's it. So now that we're at this stage, we have in some Firebase utility functions. We brought in Firebase. We have our sign up component starting out. Let's move on to the next video where we'll continue fleshing this out.